Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. South Korean President Lee Jae Myung is making his global debut at the 80th United Nations General Assembly, a high-stakes stage for both symbolic messaging and strategic visibility. He'll deliver a keynote speech, chair a Security Council session on AI and global security, and meet with key players across U.S. politics and finance. While there's no formal summit with President Trump, South Korea's diplomatic bandwidth is being tested as Lee tries to reestablish Korea as a credible, democratic actor, all while defending its national interests. Tonight, we break down the meaning and momentum behind this visit. For this, we invite Frank Jannuzi, President and CEO at the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation. A big welcome.
Nice to be here with you.
And also joining us is Hannah Kim, Associate Professor at Seogang University's GSIS. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me again.
So, let's begin our discussion with Mr. Jannuzi. So, like I said, this visit marks President Lee's first appearance at the UN. What's the broader international significance of this special moment, and what might the world be actually watching for?
Well, this visit comes at a time when President Lee is just establishing his presidency. And he's also establishing his leadership on a global stage of a middle power, which is no longer taking a back seat to anyone. The Republic of Korea is a top 10 economy, a top 10 security partner and power in the world, and also a leader in democratic values and democratic systems and human rights. And I expect the president to emphasize all of these points when he takes the stage today, and again when he takes the unprecedented position of being a South Korean president to lead the UN Security Council general debate tomorrow. For President Lee, this moment really signifies Korea's emergence on the global stage, as well as his own personal journey from mayor of Seongnam to president of the Republic of Korea. And so I believe that it's an important moment for him at a time when the United States is arguably stepping back on certain key issues such as climate change or on foreign development assistance. Will Korea be stepping up? And I think that President Lee's personal message of his own journey as a democratic leader in the Republic of Korea, as well as Korea's emergence as a nation, as a leading nation on AI, on high tech, on economic development, that will be the theme of the next couple of days.
Right, it will definitely be a very symbolic moment, especially as other middle powers also will watch how South Korea positions itself. Now, let's also invite Professor Kim into the conversation. So, from Seoul's vantage point, then, what does President Lee actually need to accomplish through this UN appearance in order to, solidify credibility as a diplomatic actor?
I think there's many things that he would need to do, but in order to kind of address that, we also have to keep in mind that he's going to be delivering the keynote speech tonight at the 80th United Nations General Assembly. And his speech is expected to be around 15 minutes long. And it's going to be taking place a little bit early on in the meeting, since I think right now he's slated to be around the 7th speaker. So during the speech, he's reportedly going to be declaring the return of democratic South Korea. And I think this was mentioned earlier, but he's also going to be presenting South Korea's foreign policy vision to the world. He's also going to be chairing the public session of the UN Security Council for the first time, and which emphasizes international cooperation on the theme of AI for all. So in order for President Lee to truly demonstrate that South Korea is a credible diplomatic actor on the global stage, he needs to go beyond these words and also contribute through tangible actions. And, for example, he could take a more proactive role in expanding international development aid, which was mentioned, and addressing multilateral challenges such as climate change and transnational crime. He could also concrete initiatives that Seoul can own diplomatically, rather than showing that South Korea can be a norm shaper rather than a rule taker. And so one prime example of this might be in terms of how South Korea could be emerging or how South Korea could lead on emerging global issues such as AI, cybersecurity, digital governance, and energy transition. And this would actually really work well, given that the session he's going to be chairing is going to be the one based on AI for all. So President Lee has the opportunity to signal that South Korea is committed to not only advancing its own AI technology, but also to lowering barriers to its use, which could be very beneficial.
Right. So we will be looking for some kind of proactive measures that can lead to tangible outcomes in terms of global issues. Now, let's also touch upon inter-Korean issues, Professor Kim. What kind of strategic signals do you think President Lee is likely to send on North Korea at the UN, especially in light of, its military, closer ties with Russia?
I think what's really interesting about this event is that President Lee is attending this year's UN General Assembly, but North Korea is also sending a delegation for the first time in 7 years. And so this makes the messages that President Lee conveys towards North Korea particularly significant. And in a recent interview with Reuters, he indicated that he could accept a temporary and pragmatic freeze on North Korea's nuclear program, which suggests that this is a strategy that acknowledges North Korea's existing nuclear capabilities while also seeking to build trust and create a foundation for dialogue for gradual denuclearization. Now, President Lee also noted that former US President Trump and Kim Jong-un appeared to have this mutual trust, and that leaves the door open for resumption of US-North Korea talks. So from this perspective, South Korea may aim to serve as a pacemaker for dialogue between the US and North Korea while attempting to restore trust and open channels for direct engagement with North Korea. But of course, we also know that North Korea has recently reacted negatively to these types of proposals. Recently, Kim Jong-un has made it quite clear that North Korea will not engage in talks as long as complete denuclearization is demanded. And he also rejected South Korea's overtures. So North Korea has also explicitly labeled South Korea as an eternal enemy and has refused inter-Korean dialogue. So within this context, President Lee is expected to strengthen cooperation with the international community and continue diplomatic efforts aimed at creating conditions for the resumption of talks. But also at the same time, he needs to seek ways to influence North Korea's position and encourage engagement.
Right. It's definitely a very complex situation that President Lee is in right now, and especially with North Korea, like Professor Kim has mentioned, is sending a high-level delegation to the UN in more than in several years. Mr. Jannuzi, how would you read into North Korea's actions then?
Well, North Korea is re-engaging after a period of self-isolation during COVID. And I think we saw with Kim Jong-un's visit to Beijing a much more confident North Korea on the global stage, striding alongside Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. And the dispatch of Vice Foreign Minister Kim to New York City, although he ranks below in prestige and power, Madam Choi Song-hui, the foreign minister, this does, to me, signal an opportunity for North Korea and the United States, perhaps, to begin to pursue some quiet talks in New York. And I think this is the real meaning of North Korea sending the vice foreign minister to New York for the UN General Assembly. And this also presents an opportunity for President Lee Jae Myung, because no U.S. engagement with the DPRK can succeed without close and careful coordination with Seoul. So it remains to be seen. I'm not too bullish. I strongly agree with Professor Kim that North Korea is a reluctant player here in terms of engaging with the United States, and North Korea has laid down some very clear markers about what they don't want to talk about, namely denuclearization. But sometimes when North Korea says one thing, they mean the opposite. For instance, when they say that South Korea is an eternal enemy, I think what they really are saying is that's the current situation, and if you want to change it, it's going to require a lot of work. And I think President Lee has adopted a very pragmatic stance that basically begins with peaceful coexistence. And that sets the bar at a low enough level that the nations might be able to get over it if they can start a dialogue. So I'm cautiously optimistic that this high-level North Korean delegation representing a more confident North Korea on the global stage, may begin some quiet dialogue with U.S. and ROK counterparts in the context of the UN General Assembly, and that would be a very positive development.
Right, so it could actually be a stepping stone to resuming dialogue with the U.S. and South Korea as well. Now, speaking of U.S., the alliance management with Washington, of course. So we are aware that there would be no formal summit between President Lee and President Trump, but there are still a lot of bilateral issues that remain critical, like trade, supply chains, and also extended deterrence, of course. So, Mr. Jannuzi, what are some key points of tension or alignment between the two governments right now?
Well, thanks for the question. I was in Seoul last week and had an opportunity to meet with some senior government officials, as well as many scholars and academics and leading thinkers in Korea. And everyone was really focused on this $350 billion investment that has been requested by the United States, by South Korea into the United States. And realizing such a huge sum is obviously going to be very, very challenging. And let me just say for the record, that number is somewhat arbitrary. There's nothing magical about 350 billion. It could have been 500 billion or 200 billion. And I think that what South Korea is going to have to try to do is to figure out how they can symbolically recognize and meet the expectations of President Trump in order to secure lower tariff rates. But the devil will be in the details in terms of the timelines and what counts in terms of meeting that $350 billion target. President Lee has been pretty clear that he believes that trying to amass such a large sum of investment into the United States in a short period of time would be financially extraordinarily difficult, not to mention politically a strain on his support back at home. So I think he's going to have to walk a fine line, trying to accede to President Trump's demands while negotiating sufficient flexibility for South Korean industries and the South Korean government to have enough flexibility in the implementation of those commitments to not break the bank literally or figuratively.
Mm-hmm. So with this situation then, Professor Kim, how much room do you think does South Korean President Lee actually have to maneuver with these kinds of demands from Washington, given domestic sensitivities around strategic autonomy, economic dependence, and also public opinion, like Mr. Jannuzi mentioned?
Yeah, I think I agree with Mr. Jun on many of these points because it's true that South Korea is highly dependent on the United States in economic, military, and security matters. Of course, this doesn't mean that South Korea is completely in a subordinate position. There's still a little bit of room to maneuver, and domestic public opinion currently also supports the idea that South Korea securing greater strategic autonomy from the US is preferred. So in line with this, the United States may also not wish South Korea to be overly dependent, particularly in the security realm. So, within this context, President Lee needs to balance maintaining trust with the US while pursuing efforts to strengthen South Korea's independent capabilities, which would hopefully increase strategic autonomy in military and security matters. I think this was the fine line that Mr. Jannuzi was mentioning as well. Economically, the US and South Korea maintains a complementary relationship, with the shipbuilding industry being a prominent example of this. And so leveraging these complementary ties, South Korea can assert its position on maybe excessive US demands. So President Lee's recent statements also suggest this as well. He indicated in an interview that fully complying with all of the US's demands could provoke domestic backlash, including potential impeachment or a second financial crisis. And so this suggests that even as an ally, South Korea is not willing to unconditionally accept all of the US's demands and intends to exercise, at least in part, its own judgment and leverage where possible.
Right, definitely. So he's really walking a fine line between asserting autonomy and managing expectations from Washington as well. Then beyond this government-to-government talks, President Lee also was actively engaged with financial and tech leaders. What does that actually tell us about the role of economic diplomacy in his broader foreign policy strategy, Professor?
I think he's signaling a strengthened focus on economic diplomacy beyond traditional government to government channels. In particular, he's scheduled to attend the Korea Investment Summit in New York on the 25th, where he's going to be presenting South Korea's economic policies directly to leading figures on Wall Street and solicit investment. And high-ranking government officials, including the Deputy Prime Minister and the Financial Services Commission Chairman, will also participate alongside SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won to reinforce private sector support. So these efforts indicate that President Lee's economic diplomacy strategy is oriented towards enhancing South Korea's international standing in the financial and tech realm through coordinated engagement between government and the private sector. But ultimately, by promoting global cooperation and investment in strategic industries such as semiconductors, batteries, and shipbuilding, and leveraging multilateral forums, President Lee is ultimately seeking to solidify its role as a trusted and influential actor in the international community based on South Korea's economic strength.
Right. Now let's go a little bit back to the demands from Washington a while ago. In his recent interview with Reuters, President Lee actually warned that large-scale U.S. investments without a currency swap could expose Korea to financial risks. Mr. Jannuzi, how do you think we should interpret this?
Well, I think this is part of a negotiating strategy. President Lee understands that as the leader of a market-based capitalist economy, he cannot simply command South Korean companies to direct investment to one place or another. And he's leery of undertaking commitments which he and his government and South Korean companies cannot fulfill. But I think what we're seeing is a continuation of what will likely be still several more weeks of negotiations with U.S. interlocutors before a final framework agreement can be agreed. And I would caution that even a so-called final agreement is one which is likely to be subject to renegotiation and reinterpretation in the months to come. This has been the track record of the U.S. Trade deals with the UK, with the EU, with Japan, and it will likely follow the similar pattern with the Republic of Korea. So the signal, the warning about the potential for a financial crisis, I don't think we're really on the cusp of any financial crisis in Northeast Asia, but this is part of a negotiating strategy designed to maximize South Korean leverage. And I agree with Professor Kim that in trying to offer up alternative talking points, President Lee will highlight the many ways in which the Republic of Korea is contributing to American economic rejuvenation as well as American security. The investments in chips and AI and high tech in the United States, South Korea is either number one or number two over the last 5 years. And these are very significant investments that matter because they create American jobs. And the promises on shipbuilding is a gift to an administration that is eager to revitalize the industrial sector as well as to bolster U.S. national security. So President Lee has cards that he can play. And the warnings about a financial impact, I think, are just part of the overall negotiating strategy that will play out over the coming weeks.
Right. So it's not really too eager. Not a very serious situation to be concerned about, and we'll need to be.
I don't think it's too dire. That's right.
So we'll need to be a little bit more patient for details moving forward. Now, looking at the broader message then, President Lee has framed South Korea's return to the UN as a recommitment to multilateralism and rule-based diplomacy. And at the same time, he's also emphasized a pragmatic nation interest first foreign policy as well. So Professor Kim, how do you think he can balance those two goals in practice?
Well, thankfully, I think multilateralism and role-based diplomacy do not necessarily conflict with a pragmatic national interest first foreign policy. And in fact, there are many areas where they align with South Korea's national interests. So achieving a balance between these two goals is therefore quite essential here. So to pursue them effectively, President Lee can adopt a pragmatic multilateralism approach. So in other words, this means that he can show respect for international norms and multilateral cooperation while ensuring that South Korea's strategic and economic interests are also clearly safeguarded in practice along the way. For example, on global issues such as climate change, global health, and semiconductor supply chains, South Korea can strengthen international trust and influence through multilateral collaboration. At the same time, South Korea can carefully adjust the terms of agreements or participation to protect domestic industrial competitiveness and economic benefits. Similarly, addressing North Korea's nuclear program through multilateral channels not only serves South Korea's security, but also contributes to stability across the Indo-Pacific. So given that the US is exerting pressure on multiple countries simultaneously, coordinated responses with similarly positioned countries are also possible. And ultimately, President Lee is likely to pursue a balance between international norms and practical benefits, which would fulfill global expectations to a certain degree, while also maintaining flexibility to protect domestic industry security and diplomatic strategy.
Right. So maintaining a balance between, both, keeping commitment to multilateralism and also while doing this by maintaining pragmatic diplomacy is a very important topic to conclude our discussion tonight. Thank you so much for your insights, Mr. Jannuzi.
감사합니다. Thank you very much.
And Professor Kim, of course, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.